Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be unto you, and the mercy of Allah and the blessings of Allah. I start in the name of Allah, the most compassionate and the most merciful. Jazakallah khairan, may Allah reward you, Brother Mubarak, for your recitation of the Quran. So now we turn to our keynote speaker, Sister Aminah Assilmi. And just to give you a brief introduction as to what this lecture is the result of. It's basically the result of a series of two things. First of all, the most immediate being our Islamic Awareness Week, which we have been having this whole week. We've been having various events and speeches, and as you can see, part of the display outside. Secondly, and more sort of more attention drawing, is the fact that the media turned its attention on Muslim women in France and Quebec when they were not permitted to wear the hijab, the Muslim covering, in their schools. And because of this, we decided to invite Sister Aminah Assilmi to come and go beyond the veil to speak on the issue of Muslim women today. Just a few words on the speaker herself. She is a proud mother of 3 and a grandmother of 3. She has a degree in broadcasting. She is the director of the International Union of Muslim Women, and she is the regional coordinator for the Council of American Islamic Relations. And she is also the coordinator for the Islamic Society of North America Field Services. And that is just the beginning of the list. So without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Sister Aminah.
Assalamu alaikum. I stand before you as a Muslim woman who is very proud of being a Muslim woman. I stand before you as a Muslim woman who chooses to wear hijab and does so very proudly. I stand before you as many women all over the world do, struggling for our right to practice our religion. Tonight I'm going to begin by discussing briefly what it means to be a Muslim woman, what Allah has said about the Muslim woman. After you know that, you may understand why women are the ones who are fighting. It's not the men who stood up in Egypt and fought when they tried to pass the law prohibiting women from wearing hijab. It was the women. It's not the men who have stood and fought in Pakistan as the women are fighting for the right to cover their hair while they're attending the universities. It's the women. It's also the women who are fighting in Tunisia when they're told not to leave their homes if they're wearing coverings. It's the women in Algeria who stand up and say, we wish to wear our hijab and be identified as Muslim women. Many people look at this and think that this symbolizes oppression, that this represents the superiority of the man to the woman. If this was true, very few of us would fight for our right to wear it. Our hijab is only one of the rights that Allah has granted to us, and it is a right. I'm going to run just through a few of them. We'll start with procreation. Allah said that the man and the woman have equal responsibility in the area of procreation, that the man is not more valuable than the woman, that it requires the two, and that both have the same responsibilities in this area. Allah decreed that women should be educated. He decreed that all of humanity should be educated. Education is vitally important to a Muslim. We must seek knowledge even into the ends of the earth, but knowledge we must have. We go beyond that in that Allah has said that the woman's voice must be heard and given due response. We have a right to voice our opinion. We do not have to be silent shadows in the background in a world that is run by men, because we will be heard. This is our right granted by Allah. It is the right of society granted by Allah, because where only one side is heard, the society cannot grow to full health. We go beyond this now to the right to own our own property, to control our own wealth, to make the decisions of finance. Women have for centuries been fighting for the right to control their own wealth. Little did they realize that Allah had granted this to us over 1,400 years ago. Whatever a woman owns is hers when she gets married and remains hers. Her husband has no rights on it at all. Whatever comes to her during the marriage remains hers. The husband has no right on it at all, except that which she chooses to give to him. He cannot even ask for what is hers. The responsibility of maintenance is his, no matter how much money she has. She controls. She makes the decisions about what is done with her property and her income. We also have the right to choose our own husband. Many people have the misconception that the marriages are arranged by family members. Now, in some cultures, unfortunately, this is true. They bypass Islamic law and follow something that comes from way beyond imagination. In Islam, the male and the female child must both be consulted before they are married. The involvement on the part of the parent is supposed to be in making sure that this female or male child, that these are the two people who belong together, that they are going to bring each other happiness, that they are going to make a solid family which will be an asset to the society. As a mother, as a grandmother, I go through this as my children reach the age of getting married. And I have to sit and I have to talk with them in the way of Islam to make sure they understand their responsibilities. So as my son, my older son, is getting ready to get married, I sat with him and explained to him his responsibilities as a husband. Then I sat with the girl he was considering to make sure she understood. Then I sat with her, with him, and with her family as we talked about the things that were important to both sides of the children. The family was very surprised when I insisted that my future daughter-in-law have a college education. And it's written into the contract that she will have a college education. My son must provide this for her. Not just the opportunity, but he must encourage her. He must make it easy for her to attain a college education. As a mother, I know that my son does value intelligence in a woman. I know that he would not long be pleased with a wife who was not as educated as he is. I know that my grandchildren would not do as well. So I am protecting my son's future happiness. I am protecting the grandchildren's future happiness by being involved in requiring those things which I know are important. There are many other things that we discussed too. We dealt with issues that could become problems in the future. Things that had been left between the two of them would never have been mentioned. They would just pray to God that everything ironed itself out. But in Islam, we recognize the fact that a man and a woman coming together does not create a new family. But a man and a woman coming together brings two complete families together to making one. And it's very important that we do it in the right way. We're not making a separate entity. We're bringing people together. We're making a stronger society, not a more splintered society, a stronger society. The importance and the involvement of the parents also comes into a greater importance should the woman decide to work, because we have extended family now. So if my daughter decides that she wants to go to work, she can leave her children with me, or she can leave her children with her mother-in-law or one of her sister-in-laws. But she doesn't have to leave the children in the care of someone that we don't know and that we have no idea what they're going to teach the children. And this is a very important thing. See, in Islam, we recognize the value of motherhood. We know that motherhood is the single most important profession in the world. That's right. This is a profession of power. We're deciding the future of the universe. What I teach my children determines whether they are builders or destroyers, peacemakers or warmongers. So yes, I'm deciding the future of the universe and how I teach my children and how they teach their children. That all comes from the mother. So we know the value and the importance of motherhood. And when we're arranging a marriage, we know that a complete family requires the presence, the continual presence of a man and a woman to give the child the full security that they have a right to expect in life. So we're very careful. Now, divorce is permissible in Islam. And we have, as women, the right to obtain a divorce should we need one. But we also know that before we come to a divorce, we're going to go through arbitration and great extremes to try and save the marriage and keep it together. But we do know that we have the right to divorce when it's necessary, and we can exercise that. Islam also provides protection and rights for the woman and the child in the case of a divorce. If divorce becomes necessary, by Islamic law, we must part amicably. We're not allowed to say anything negative about or to our former spouse. We can only be kind with each other. This is very important because where you have a man and a woman who have a child and then they separate and they're busily ripping each other apart, what they don't realize is that actually they're ripping their child apart. It's the child who suffers. Every time you say something bad about the mother, it's the child who suffers. Every time something bad is said about the husband, the father, it is the child who suffers. So Allah said, none of this. If there is divorce, it will be amicable. We must be peaceful. Another thing that Islam provides is the responsibility for the child. A man is 100% responsible for his child whether he lives in the house or not. He can't get away with paying $150 or $300 or even $1,000 a month. His responsibility goes beyond finances. He's responsible for the mental, the psychological, the emotional development of this child. He must be a part of the child's life. And he must provide financially for everything for the child. Many times in divorces, there's not very many divorces, but where there are amongst Muslims, you find that the man willingly will give money to his former wife so that she will remain in the house with the children. Who better to take care of the child than the mother? Why hire a babysitter if the mother is available? So we do things in an amicable way which allows the child to grow up without the strife, without the pain and the agony that they suffer from the other kinds of divorces. Our rights continue on. So we've had the right of procreation, the right of education, the right of voice, the right of owning our property, of choosing our husband, of disposing, if necessary, of our husband, the right to protection for our children, disposing not through death, okay? Let's make that clear, all right? That right we don't have, okay? We continue on into the right of hijab. And hijab is a right. It's not just an obligation and a responsibility, it is a right for the woman. The Quran says that we should cover ourselves and identify ourselves as being Muslim. My hijab does that. When I walk down the street, I am identified as being a Muslim. The second part says that we would not be molested. Now, molesting does not just mean rape, and we've simplified things a little bit too much when we start talking about Islam. First thing you have to know is that rape has nothing to do with sex, physical desire, love, any of that. Rape is an act of violence and hate, and it does not depend on the way a woman is dressed. A woman does not ask to be raped by wearing less clothing. That is not why a man rapes. A man does not rape because he is sexually excited by the physical appearance of a woman. This is an act of hate for women. It is an act of violence against women. And they even rape 70 and 80-year-old women with no figure. Okay, this dress prevents us from being molested because this dress reminds us constantly of who we are. When I pass a store window and I see myself, I'm reminded that I am a Muslim. The knowledge that I am a Muslim says you are a woman of value. You are a woman of worth, of dignity, of importance. And when I walk down the street or interact with anyone, I interact with that knowledge. And the way that I behave, because I know my own value, dictates the way other people interact with me. So when I get on the bus, I expect the men to get up and give me their seats, and they do. When I come to a door, I expect it to be opened, and it is. When I walk into a room, I expect all lewdness and profanity to cease immediately, and it does. Because they know that I know what my own importance is, what my own worth is, and I am granted the dignity of who I am. So when it says to protect us from being molested, it's because we get an attitude that goes beyond attitude. Because we have the attitude of Allah. This is a right that we will fight for. The right of hijab is something that I have given up a great deal for. I am no longer allowed to work in my own profession, which is radio and television, because I will not remove the hijab. I cannot work in most professions because I will not remove the hijab. In the States, you can't be a public school teacher, you can't hold public office, you can't work in any of the federal or state offices, you certainly can't work with television or radio, not even behind the scenes, okay? I was a producer, I'm not an on-camera person, I don't like cameras and lights and microphones. But even that we are not allowed to do if we cover ourselves in the United States. We continue to wear it and we continue to educate people about Islam because this is not a sign of oppression. The way we dress is a sign of dignity and pride. Pride in being Muslim women, and we want the world to know who and what we are. We find it interesting when we go to state functions, and in spite of themselves, they're frequently forced to invite me to functions that they would rather I not show up at. But when I attend, I'm always fascinated because, you know, when you're going to a state function, you're going to dress to the tenth, okay? The men come, and how much of the man is showing? Hands and face. He has to be dignified. Only his hands and his face will be displayed. Long pants, long sleeves, shirt, vest, I mean, he is covered. Now, how is the woman expected to show up? She's expected to be down to here, down to there, up to here, as much less as possible and as tight as possible. Now, why is it that a man to be dignified is covered, but a woman covered is oppressed? There's a bit of inequality there. It seems to me that if dignity means that a man is covered, then when a woman is covered, there should be dignity as well. And if a woman who is covered is oppressed, then a man wearing clothes must be oppressed as well. Someone needs to talk with our political officials. They are so oppressed. See, hijab is not oppressive. It's not a sign of oppression of women. It's not a sign of inequality. This is a mark of dignity and pride. And it's not something that we Muslim women are going to give up easily. We'll put our lives on the line where it's necessary. We don't give up. I tried to talk about the rights of women a little bit because I want you to understand why we are not willing to take our clothes off. Thank you. I want you to understand that is what is happening in many of the so-called Islamic countries has nothing to do with Islam. And we will fight the governments even there for our rights that were granted to us by Allah. We have an advantage over most women in that the rights granted to us by Allah over 1,400 years ago are permanent and forever. And we know what they are. We have something that we can look into and see what we are supposed to be like. We also know that what Allah has said is for the benefit not only of a single individual woman, but of a family, of a community, of a state, of the universe. We know that everything in Islam is of benefit, and this includes our hijab and our modesty. Now, I don't want to leave from up here without letting you know that hijab is not just for women. There is an appropriate dress for men as well. The brothers, some may cringe here, the brothers are not allowed to wear tight pants. It's not permissible. It's also not healthy, and when you reach the age of 49 or 50, you'll know the difference. Men are also not allowed to wear their shirts unbuttoned down to their waist to show off their hairy or non-hairy chests. Men are required modesty as much as women are. Men are not allowed to dress effeminately. Silk is reserved for women. Gold is reserved for women. Men are not to wear them. There is a proper dress for men and a proper dress for women. There is a proper dress for behavior for women and the same proper behavior for men. When we talk with each other, we are to lower our gaze. We're not to gaze into each other's faces, into each other's eyes, but to lower our gaze when we are conversing with each other. Not just women, but men must lower their gaze as well. All that Allah has ordered is of benefit to all of us. It is recognized in Islam that there is no such thing as absolute independence or absolute individuality. We are an interdependent species. We cannot survive alone. We cannot survive alone. Knowing that we are an interdependent species means that we know in exercising our rights, we cannot take another individual's rights away from them. So in securing our rights, we must be sure that everyone else's rights are secured as well. In securing the right to wear our hijab, we cannot require that other people wear hijab. This is not a part of our way. We don't force our thoughts upon other people. This is not Islam. Each person must grow and learn and obey Allah according to their understanding and their ability. But each person must also seek the knowledge to understand where they are supposed to be at. To talk about the woman in Islam, to talk about the struggles that we are facing throughout the world at this time, would take maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 hours. And I don't have that much time. I want to allow time for interaction. So I'm going to close here and invite questions. I'm going to ask not to have long comments. Okay? If you want to get into a debate, you can schedule a time with me later. I am not here to debate with anyone, and I will not. So if you wish to debate, you can make an appointment and I will meet you at another time in another place. This is a time for questions and dialogue. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, I'll just first of all take one question from here, then I'll take it from from right and then from the left. I may have misunderstood, but was it a must for your daughter-in-law to have a college education to marry your son? If so, why?
Well, I tried to explain that when we dealt with setting up the contract for them for getting married, I recognized how important her education was to my son. I also recognized how important it was to her that I knew that she truly wanted to have a college education. It was by agreement between me, her parents, her and him, that was included in the contract that she would have the education. And it was done because we knew the importance to them, and we didn't want them, I didn't want my son to later on say it's inconvenient. I wanted him to know he had this obligation and could not back away from it. I wanted the same thing for her. I wanted her to recognize the importance of education and for her to go ahead and pursue it. Now you have to understand also that, just as in the case of my daughter, we have another part of the agreement. I didn't cover all of the agreement. The agreement is quite sizable because the negotiations that went on were quite prolonged. All right? Now, if they have children right after they get married, her college education will wait until they start to school. My youngest granddaughter starts school this next year, and at that time my daughter will return to college to complete her education. But as long as she has a young one in the house, the understanding, the agreement between us is the first obligation is to the child. And we will put aside some things that we want for ourselves for the benefit of our children. So my daughter will be going to school part-time. If my daughter-in-law gets pregnant right away, then she will also stay at home until the children start school. And then as they go on, then they continue with more hours of education.
Thank you for coming on display to address us. One of the things that troubles me about women in Islam books and pamphlets and things that I pick up is that they're always very theoretical. They're always, this is what Islam says about women, and women are equal in Islam, and it's always very theoretical. And when you look around the world, you don't see that at all. In Muslim countries, I don't see what I consider to be equality. Women staying home, women not being able to drive cars, things like that. And I was wondering if you could speak to this, the sort of discrepancy between theory and practice. Why you think it's occurring in such a vast majority of countries which profess to be Islamic, and any practical advices on how we can change this. Very often I say, well, they're doing this, and the people tell me, well, no, that's culture, that's not Islam. But, I mean, when does culture stop, and when do we start practicing Islam?
Gee, that's a question I've been asking myself for years. When does everybody drop their culture and recognize that there's only Islam? It would save a lot of trouble. How did all of this start? It started when the Muslims ceased recognizing the importance of knowledge, ceased recognizing the importance of reading the Quran themselves and gaining the knowledge themselves, and started relying only upon scholars. Now, scholars are very important because they help to open Islam to us. They help us to reach a higher level of understanding. But you have to understand that when you are learning from a person, you will not learn more than that person has to offer without going to another person. And many people have been limited in their knowledge according to what their single teacher has wanted. Many people in cultures, the daughter has learned what the mother knew, and has usually forgotten half of that. And then she gives that one half to her daughter, who loses another half. And it goes on down, and you just keep losing more and more of the knowledge. It was continued during the era of colonialism. The colonialists could not deal with Islam. They had to destroy it as best they could, and we had the evidence for them on how to do it. All they had to do was to read the hadith, and they knew how to destroy the Islam and the power of the Muslims. We were told that we could not be conquered from without until we destroyed ourselves from within. We let go of the knowledge ourselves, otherwise we could never have been conquered. we moved away from the practice of Islam, or we could never have been conquered. Now, in order to maintain control of us, they must see to it that we never gain the knowledge of Islam. So in different countries, they did different things. They set up schools for educating the imams. They encouraged only those imams who would agree with the state. They made things easy only for those teachers that would agree with the state. Or they would encourage ignorant people to become religious leaders. They would issue papers saying that so-and-so was a mullah, or so-and-so was an imam, or so-and-so was sheikh, when they weren't qualified to be. And so we began to be taught by ignorant people. We can only set things straight through knowledge. There are, alhamdulillah, in most cases the families really do care about what is of benefit, but the reality is that in many countries the parents are not using the wrong yardstick for measuring the spouse, using the wrong yardstick. The first thing they look at in many places is going to be the degree, the profession. In some countries, you've got to be a doctor. In others, they want an engineer. The next thing they look at is where is the social standing of the particular family. The third thing they look at is the money. How much money does he have? What is his earning potential? On the girl's side, when they're looking at the girl, okay, how pretty is she? What's her social standing? And how much money does her parents have? That's what they're looking at. We also have instances, and I'm dealing with families right now on numerous of them, so I'm speaking from direct knowledge. We have many cases where young people have found people that they would like to be married to. They're very suitable because they're both Islamic activists. They have the same goals in life, they have the same desires in life, and the parents are preventing the marriage because it's not the right class, it's not the right nationality. Yes, it's not the right nationality. Sometimes it's the right nationality, but a shade too dark. And so they won't allow the marriage to happen. And this is not Islam. And so in this case, we have to stand up and really work to educate the parents. And when I'm counseling the parents in these cases, it's very difficult and very delicate thing to make them understand that Islamically they are doing a wrong thing to prohibit this marriage. Just because they have a cultural prejudice, they should not pass it on to their child. An example is that I have an Egyptian girl who happens to be wanting to be married to a Pakistani boy, and neither family will agree to it. Yet they've been neighbors for their whole life. They've lived on the same block for their whole life. They've gone to school together, they've grown up together, they've played together. They've been part of the same Islamic organizations throughout their whole lives. They want the same things, they know each other, they're comfortable and familiar with each other. It's not like he lives in one country and she in another. They've grown up together, but the parents will not allow them to get married. They want someone from their own country. And the children are really not from that country anymore. They haven't lived there for their whole lives. And it's a very complex situation. I'll shorten my answers. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I've got a bunch of questions here. So
Why don't you do two from there and
okay, well,
from the mic.
five from here because
Okay.
they're all to do with
I'm
hijab.
agreeable. What you need?
Okay, basically they're all to do with hijab. One is that if the woman has the right to wear hijab, do they also have the right not to wear hijab? I.e., is it possible for a woman to be a good Muslim woman and not be covered? And also, there are questions about, why doesn't a man wear a hijab on his head? And
You should.
also, okay, let's see. And the other one is that in Algeria, the armed Islamic group has killed women who do not wear hijab. What is the basis for various Islamic movements imposing moral standards through violence and coercion?
Yeah, I can deal with them all. They all lump together very nicely. Allah is the judge. Allah is the judge. We are not given the right to judge each other. You cannot tell the iman of a person by their outer appearances. We do not have the right to require anything of anyone. Islam is not allowing compulsion in religion. This is not saying that hijab is not a part of Islam. But hijab that is worn for any reason other than for Allah serves no value and is of no purpose. Wearing hijab when it is not for Allah is being a hypocrite, a liar, and a deceiver. And this is not what you want. This is not an asset to the community. This is not an asset to Islam. It is not an asset to the family. Yes, we want to encourage the wearing of hijab for both men and women. Yes, the men should be covering their hair, although I know there are some schools that say it's not as important, okay, but it is, by all schools, better, at least, if the men are covering their hair in some way. I wish I saw more of you covering in one way or the other. It would please me enormously. The men frequently, I had one man here in Canada come to me and say, don't you think we should encourage the women to wear the hijab so that people could see the Muslims? And my response is, I would like to see the men dressing in a way that they could be identified as being a Muslim. And that doesn't mean a beard, because a lot of men wear beards who are not Muslim. There's also some nationalities, I happen to be Native American, and Native American men don't grow beards. It's not physically possible for us to grow beards. But we can still be in service of Allah. So you can't judge by a beard. There have to be other ways that you can look and see whether someone is a Muslim. And so you should be identified as a Muslim as well. The people who are forcing it, they have to answer to Allah. Because our decisions in Islam, they're to be ours.
Okay, I'll take a question from the staff.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I think some people have they have this sort of inner turmoil going within themselves. I was surprised to know that in Quebec they had this situation with a sister that was denied the ability to enter school because of the hijab. In terms of your opinion, do you think it's the two different sides? Should we take the approach that we should lobby and go to the government and, like for instance, the situation in the United States about wearing the hijab and inhibiting your profession? What feasible means we need to take? Because I think a lot of Muslims are incognito because we don't know which way to go. Should we take a political due process step, or should we start to be, what's the other option available?
We have the same situations in the United States, by the way. Just a matter of weeks ago, a woman in St. Paul was arrested because she had on hijab. And so we have the same situations happening. When that happened in St. Paul, the women organized immediately. And we called newspapers and television stations and radio stations. We did talk shows, we did interviews, we went to the police department, we went to the Senate, we went to the state offices, we went everywhere to make sure that they understood that this was something that could not happen. We were not silent. And we went through using public relations, and this is something Muslims need to learn, the effective use of the media. All right? We didn't yell, chant, and scream. We were not violent. We were not obnoxious. Every letter we wrote was polite and persuasive and carefully worded. Every meeting that we had, we came forward positive, kind, and polite in the way of the example that we had. We were involved in all fronts. We continue to be. We're involved in the legal process. You should be involved in the legal process too. You can't change things without being involved. But you have to know the limits. I mean, I don't give bayon to the President of the United States, but I know I am subject to some of his decisions. So what I have to do is educate the foolish man so he knows what the right decisions are to make. Well, if we don't do that here in Canada, then we have to expect things like Quebec to continue to happen. If you don't speak out, it may happen in Ottawa as well. If the Muslims in Quebec don't speak out, it'll continue. If the Muslims of France don't get a little more positive in the way they're handling things, it'll continue. The Muslims of France still aren't standing up and explaining that hijab is a right, that it's not a sign of oppression. They're still not saying it, and we have to defend our rights. So get involved in every way you can. Learn to use the media. Develop journalists. Muslims need to develop journalists. Encourage your children into the field of journalism, into radio and television. We need them because they influence the masses. A broadcaster can influence millions of people, where an imam can only influence the people who will come to him to be heard. Think about it. Sorry.
There are a lot of concerns here about concerning professional women as regards child rearing, and what is the role of the husband in looking after the child. Like, why can't the husband stay at home to look after the child rather than the wife? And also, what is the? Do you consider man to be dominion? I guess over the woman, and is he considered to be the leader in the household? And just to sort of, I guess, in addition to this, another question that you said that the laws set by Allah for you were set 1400 years ago, but if Islam is universal, how about people before that time?
Okay, we'll start with that one first, okay, because it doesn't link in with the others and I don't want to forget it, okay? Allah has sent prophets through all times, okay? And the message was the same. The teachings were the same. But the message was not written down at the time of delivery, and the message was changed, warped, and altered in many ways. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was the seal of prophets, the last that was required, because the Quran was written down at the time of revelation. It was not written from the memory of someone. It was not written from suppositions. It was written from the actual word of God. So the people before had prophets as well, and those prophets also came from God. When we talk about Moses and Isa, all of them down the line. Now we get into the subject of man. Hi, Sugar Bear. That's a cutie. Okay, the man and his dominion. All right. The man has, in the case of a disagreement, the man has the last word. And it's necessary that one person have the last word, otherwise an argument could go on indefinitely. So the man is given the last word, but that does not give him complete authority, because the man is also required to function in consultation with his wife. So he must be considerate of her and her needs in making any decisions. And when they're having their discussion, if it comes down to that it has to be ended, the man has the final word. That's his degree of authority over her. When it comes to whether a man can stay at home and take care of the children while the woman goes to work, yes, he can. I know several Muslim families where the man actually prefers it this way. And one of the brothers, he has 6 children. The 6 children were driving his wife absolutely bonkers. He hated going to work and leaving the children because that's what he liked to do the most. And he's wonderful. All of his children have memorized the Quran. All of them recite Quran beautifully. He does a wonderful house. He cooks really well. He's, alhamdulillah. And he's also 100% a man, all the way down the line. Okay? She happens to be a doctor, and she was very eager to go into the practice, and they reached the agreement between them. You know, this is really what I'd like to do. Do you have a problem with it? And they agreed to it between them. It's what she wanted, it's what he wanted. Can a man require a woman to work? No, a man can't require a woman to work. Can a man use the money that a woman earns when she's working? No, not unless she lets him. Only the amount that she allows. He doesn't have any right to her income. So they had a lot of agreements to come to, you know, as far as her income when they made the decision that he wanted to stay at home and quit his career, and she would now pursue her career while he stayed at home and had fun with the kids. And they have a great relationship. I love to go to their home. It's a beautiful thing to walk into their home. The relationship between the husband and wife is magnificent. Such kindness, such consideration, such love between them. It's so obvious. You can see them sneaking looks at each other, and you know how much they love each other. You know it. And the adoration of the children. And there's so much peace, So much peace. The children never seem to be fighting. And they're certainly not waiting for Daddy to come home and punish them. Daddy's already there. Islamically, the man, whether he's working or not, must be involved in bringing up the children. He has to be there. A man should be changing diapers when he's home as much as a woman. Diapers are not a woman's domain. It's a man's too. You made the child. You had your share in making the child. You got your share in taking care of the child. And a child will grow up much stronger, much happier, much more healthy if he has a positive interaction with the father. It's necessary for the girls because a girl interacts with her husband according to the way she interacted with her father. A lot of times I have to caution men on the way they behave with their wives, because how you behave with your wife, that's what your daughter will expect. If you strike your wife, if you're rude to your wife, this is what your daughter will expect and accept. So remember, how you treat your wife, your daughter's husband is going to treat her. So be careful. Okay, and women, the same admonition goes to you. And being careful how you interact with your husband as well. Boys in particular need to have a lot of time with their fathers so that they can learn how to be men, so that they can learn how to interact in society, so they can be confident and secure. You can't just come in, say Salamu Alaikum, do your prayers, and go away from the children, shove them in another room. They need more than this. And if you look at the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I mean, he carried his grandchildren in the salat, both male and female. They were allowed to crawl all over him. He would run to see them constantly. He was so loving and doting on his children and his grandchildren. And he was certainly a man.
Okay, these are questions again on hijab. One question is, what exactly is hijab? What are the requirements? Another is that some scholars or intellectuals say that the word headpiece is not mentioned in the Quran. Another is that does a mother have the right to force her daughter to dress the way the mother thinks is Islamically right? And in addition to that, are you suggesting that non-Muslim women have no sense of value?
We have a lovely floor show going on here. This is wonderful. Proper hijab. There's a lot of dispute. Okay, so I'm just going to lay out what is minimal. Okay? Your hair should be covered, your body should be covered, your arms should be covered, your legs should be covered. It should not be in something that is sheer, and it should not be in something that is tight to show off your figure. Okay? This is in front of men and non-Muslim women. Now, when you're amongst the Muslim women, again, there's a proper dress, and you have to be covered from here to your knees. And again, it must be loose-fitting, and it must not be sheer. So there's a proper way of dressing all the time. These are the minimums. The minimums. This allows a lot of flexibility. It allows a lot of room for individual creativity. It allows room for culture. It allows room for imagination. But that is the minimum, and anything less than that is less than the minimum.
And another question in addition to that was, are you suggesting that non-Muslim women have no sense of value?
No, I'm not suggesting that non-Muslim women have no sense of value, not by any means, okay? I grew up amongst non-Muslim women who had great sense of value and who I valued enormously, and who taught me a lot of very important things. So it has nothing to do with making that kind of accusation by any means, okay? There is a difference in the way that we believe in interacting. there is a difference that we think is better as far as the development of society. In many cases, you look at it, and like my grandmother would say, it's very old-fashioned in the way that we dress, in the way that we interact, in the way that we are with each other. And yes, maybe it is, but maybe that's because that was a better time and a better way of being. There was certainly less violence, there was certainly less abuse, there was certainly less divorce, there was certainly happier times for our children. There were a lot of benefits in that. Change is not always for the better. Change is not just by nature good. So we have not altered or changed because we believe that our book comes from God and cannot be changed. Some other religions do periodically rewrite their holy books or reinterpret their holy books. We do not do that. We believe that Islam is for all times and correct for all times and cannot be changed, cannot be altered, cannot be improved upon.
Okay, any questions from the floor?
Assalamu alaikum. I just, you touched about the issue of the hijab from the right point of view. Don't you think it is the right, it is the order of Allah?
Yes, it is the order of Allah. It is a part of Islam. It's required. It's a part of our Islam. This is the proper way of dressing. Just as there is a proper way for men to dress, there's a proper way for women to dress. But whether it's the proper way or not, we don't have the right to enforce it upon anyone. I can't go through this room and make every man in this room to take off the tight pants or to put on a hat or a turban or a scarf or something like that. I don't have that right. So I don't have the right to enforce it. What I have the right to do is educate people, to raise their awareness, to encourage them to grow and develop and to appreciate that which Allah has told us is best. Just I don't have the right to enforce it.
Okay, you're still welcome to come up to the mics.
You're talking about arranged marriage. It's not arranged marriage that we force our children to marry so and so. It's just kind of protection that older people, like as a parent, know what is good for their children.
I think you misunderstood what I said about arranged marriages. When I was talking about the involvement of the parents, I mean, this is what we're talking about, is that the parents are involved in it, but it's not without consultation with the children. I mean, the children cannot be married without their consent. That's Islamic law.
Yeah, but
And so we don't do that. And if,
sometimes our children are so young, they're so emotional, they don't know what will happen after.
but we still, whether you think that or not, you don't have the right to require the marriage if they don't agree to it. This is Islamic law. So whether you think the children are too young and that they won't agree to it because they're too young or emotional or not, as long as they don't agree, you can't do it. We can't alter that. We can't alter that.
That's true, but sometimes the parents have to get involved.
Well, I encourage involved in it. I mean, after all, I've been involved in my children in getting their marriage, and I didn't say yes to the first one, and I encouraged on the second one. I said, this girl, this classmate of yours, this is really a good girl. This one I really like. I like having her around. You should give her more consideration. And so then he took a second look at her. He hadn't really paid attention before that, and he took a second look at her because he'd been more attracted to another one who was more vibrant and energetic and everything, but I knew that this quiet one was more suitable to him. So, yeah, I encourage the involvement, so you're not understanding what I'm saying. I've been very involved in the marriages of my children, very involved, to the limits that Islam says. If my son had said on the quiet one, "No, Mom, I don't want her," that would be the end of it for me. I couldn't have done anything about it because it's not my right, even though I knew she was the better choice. I couldn't do anything if he said no. And the same thing with my daughter. When it came time for her to get married, okay, I mean, there was one man, I think I probably would have died if she'd gone ahead and insisted on being married to him, but when it came down to it and I presented Patrick to her, as much as I wanted him for a son-in-law, as much as I thought he would be a good son-in-law, if my daughter said no, that would have been the end of the discussion. I couldn't have gone any further.
Suggestions on protection from the parents as well.
Well, that's what I said. That's what I said, and continue to say. Okay.
Okay, there are a couple
It's okay, she doesn't bother me. Oh, okay.
Okay, there are a couple of questions here of the issue, we often talked about issue of polygamy. As I understand, men are allowed to have 4 wives. Is this not the height of unfairness?
Oh, I forgot to bring that up. I'm sorry. I'm talking about women's rights, and I forgot one of the most controversial rights that women have, and that is the right to a co-wife. Oh, I see. You think that polygamy is for men. Oh, my goodness. Let's straighten this out right now. Okay. Yes, a man can have 4 wives. That's true. And along with the wives, remember that a man is 100% financially responsible, and he also has to answer to a law if he is unfair to his wife, even if there's only one. If he hasn't been fair to his wife, he must answer to a law. And along with when he got the first wife, he got a mother-in-law. And a father-in-law, and probably a few brother-in-laws. And you talk about keeping peace. When there's 1 woman in the house, try keeping peace with 2, or 3 or 4, especially if the man was the one who chose them. What does a man get out of polygamy? A giant headache and a financial burden. But when it comes to polygamy, a lot of people are very insecure with polygamy, and you have to be truthful and honest with yourself on how you feel about it. But you need to re-examine polygamy. First of all, let's get rid of this idea that God only gave things to men. This is a Christian concept. It has nothing to do with Islam. Okay? God gave equally to men and women. And it just might be that the reason there was only 1 Eve and 1 Adam was because God was telling Eve, 1 man is enough. Maybe God wasn't saying anything to Adam. He was telling Eve, believe me, 1 is enough. Now, when we talk about co-wives, you have to realize that in Islam we recognize that women have needs that go beyond for food, shelter, and clothing. We have physical needs, psychological needs, emotional needs, and those needs must be met. In Islam, those needs may only be met through marriage. We also face the problem even today, and have throughout all of history, and will continue through all of history, to have more women than men. According to the U.S. Census for 1990, if we married every man to a woman, every eligible man who thought like a man, to a woman, we would still have better than 20 million women who had no chance of marriage. But those 20 million women still have the same needs, the same desires, and the same right to have those needs fulfilled. Well, she could take the option of deprivation, and that's what it is deprivation. But that's been proven to be physically unhealthy, psychologically unhealthy, mentally unhealthy. She can take the option of taking someone else's husband, but that doesn't change the numbers, only the people. And it now leaves a different woman out there with the same needs, and now then some children without a full-time father. It also causes suspicion amongst women, so that the women continue to be competing with each other and not trusting with each other. Oh God, don't let her get too close, she's not married. Get her married to somebody fast before my husband gets interested. You know, shove her out the door, don't let her come anywhere around. It causes mistrust because you're afraid that your husband may choose another person over you. rather than being sisters with each other. Now in Islam, we want for our sisters and our brothers that which we want for ourselves. And so we have to sit and think, what would we want for ourselves? Would we want to have a life with no chance of having our physical needs met? And if not, then we need to examine polygamy. Now I have to tell you, when I first became aware that I was a Muslim, the day I took my Shahada, that was the day I became aware, my Shahada was a wee bit different because I didn't feel the same way that I do now. So I'm going to tell you what I said at that time. I said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, and I will never cover my hair. And if my husband takes another wife, I'll castrate him. A few years after embracing Islam, accepting the fact that I was indeed a Muslim, I set out to write an expose on polygamy to try and show Muslims that they should no longer practice this backward, wayward thing that just had no place in modern society. I spent 6 years researching for this. I interviewed many, many, many polygamous relationships, and I was very surprised at what I found. Now, I interviewed both the successful and the non-successful. I submitted the book for publication, and it was entitled Marriage and Family Life in Islam, and none of the big publishing houses wanted to accept it. I recently retitled and resubmitted it as making it together a successful guide to the practical guide to the successful practice of polygamy, and I have 3 publishing houses wanting it. The book doesn't contain that much about polygamy. Sorry, you may be disappointed. But in the course of my study and talking with these people, studying Quran, studying Hadith, checking scientific facts, reading the census books, reading different papers written by prominent psychologists and sociologists, I came finally to understand the value of polygamy and the importance of polygamy in our life. Now this does not, don't get the idea that I'm promoting polygamy, because I don't think there's very many men around that can handle it, in all honesty. Okay? Some of the men that I've talked to that do handle it very beautifully were very quick to tell me that the only thing they really felt that they got from polygamy was a giant headache. One brother, Abdurrahman, he used to tell me, oh, Aminah, if I knew then what I know now, if I make one unhappy with me, all 4 are unhappy with me. And then their mothers get involved. I have no peace. I have to be very careful. When we went on Hajj this year, there were 2 gentlemen in our party who had multiple wives, and I observed them in their shopping. One brother was determined to buy diamond rings for his wives. Now they had to be of equal value and equal consideration, but could not be identical. You can't make it easy by going out and buy 2 identical rings. He had to show to his wives that he had given consideration to their unique personalities. But he couldn't spend more on one than the other. I mean, this brother put so much effort into buying those rings. And the other brother, when he was shopping for the dresses, it was the same thing. The consideration, this one likes purple, so her dress should have purple on it. This one likes green, so her dress should have green. This one looks better in this cut, this one looks better in that cut. Okay? But I had interviewed their wives, and I knew the personalities of their wives. And I also know the successfulness of their marriages. I'll also tell you about Abdurrahman. He was not given a choice. Polygamy was not his choice. He never intended to practice polygamy. Never wanted to. But he married the first one, Aisha. Aisha wanted her best friend, and so she convinced her husband to marry her best friend. Together they got together and decided they wanted a 3rd friend. And they talked him into that. And then they decided to bring in their 4th friend. And Aisha said, if it would have been possible, we would have brought a few more of our girlfriends in. We have a great time together. You know, they really do. But they chose their co-wives. And this is something that the brothers need to take into consideration, too, is that, you know, your wives will spend more time with each other than they will with you. They need to be able to get along with each other. Don't set your wives against each other. Because when we're talking about the curse that is on the person who comes between a man and his wife, it can be the husband himself who comes between himself and his wife by putting his wives at disagreement or competition with each other.
Another question to do with something which I guess is seen as controversial. Many in the West seem to believe, due to media coverage, that in Islam female children are to be circumcised. Is there any truth to this?
No. Female circumcision is directly against Islam. This is a cultural practice that was never, ever a part of Islam. The circumcision of a man is done for cleanliness. They circumcise a girl because they think it will increase her chances of chastity until she's married, and chastity during the marriage. This is not Islam. And if you're doing it, you better think twice about it, because you're going to have to answer to Allah for it. This is not Islam. This is a cultural practice, one of those things we must throw out.
Any more questions from the floor?
How you doing? Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
I have noticed some of the very highly qualified and God-fearing women, they are covering even their faces. I can understand what is their clear. Even in Pakistan, Bangladesh, I've seen those are Muslim activists. They normally cover their faces. What is their real stand and how the Prophet's wives that they're covering their faces or not? I don't know. Can you please clarify?
Okay. I really, in all truthfulness and honesty, prefer to cover even my face. I am more comfortable in it. I'm much more content in that way. And I would cover my face at all times, except I made a commitment to dawah. And one of the things that I was discovering was that when people saw me, they were so frightened that they couldn't hear what I had to say. So I went back to the minimum in order to help people to hear my words better. This is a beautiful thing, the experience of covering the face. It's a very beautiful experience, and many women do choose it. And as a woman who used to do it, I can tell you the value in it myself. It was the best way of being. And as soon as I have enough other women trained to go out and giving talks like this, so I don't have to do them anymore, I fully intend to go back to wearing it.
I'll just read one question and then I'll take another one from the floor. Okay. In order to prove that you are a true Muslim, must you give up your culture and identity?
No. No, you only give up those things which are against Islam and those things which will separate you from other Muslims. Okay? So we have to learn that we as Muslims are one. I am Cherokee Indian. And in those areas where being Cherokee Indian is in direct line with Islam, then this is great. And those things that are not, then those things are not done. I do not give up my cultural practices. I still carry my name. My son still has he has a second name as well. His name is Muhammad, but he's also known amongst my people as Little Wolf. I am Aminah, but I am known amongst my people in tribal gatherings. Then I go by another name. And this is in line with Islam. There is nothing wrong with maintaining your culture and maintaining your identity. Don't think that one culture is better than another culture, okay? I was born in America by Allah's choice. Allah chose that I was born there, that I was educated there, that I was born to American parents. Allah chose the experiences that I had. If Allah is truly all-wise and all-knowing, then I should be pleased with that which Allah has chosen for me. So where Allah chose to put me was His choice. I didn't sign any kind of petition. And had He wished me to be an Arab or a Pakistani, or a Zulu or whatever, Allah would have had it to be so. I will not question the authority, the knowledge, the wisdom, the omnipotence of Allah.
Some scholars say that the word head cover is not in the Quran or it's not in Islam. I just want to say that in Surah An-Nur, the word Kumuri Henna is in there, and the symbol for that is Khimar, and Khimar means head cover in Arabic. Islam.
Thank you, that's true. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My question pertains to the fact that there have arisen a lot of so-called feminists, if I may use the word, such as Fatima Mernissi and Fatima Ibrahim, actually, who was here, I think, about 8 months ago. And they're getting a lot of support from, the so-called intellectual elite in Western society. So I was wondering what would be your response to these self-proclaimed intellectuals, such as Fatima Mernissi and Fatima Ibrahim. For example, in my library, we have a lot of books by these authors. And Fatima Mernissi, she's all over our library.
Yes, and Fatima Mernissi has been for years refusing to get into a discussion with me about what true Islam is about. She doesn't have the courage to meet a Muslim woman. Yes, secular feminists support her because she says the things that they want for people to accept and believe, and she's accepted by the people to try and destroy Islam and drive Muslims apart. And her books are used in the women's studies departments all across the country. And the works of the true Muslim women are not accepted. They're not even accepted by publishing houses, let alone by universities. But we stand to earn some of that problem on ourselves because not enough of our women are writing on an intellectual level. Not enough of our women are striving to gain the knowledge and the ability to share this information. And I challenge the women and I challenge the men to encourage the women to do the writing and to spread the truth of Islam on an intellectual level that can be used in the universities. Give me the books, I will see that they are published and that they are put in the universities. But give me the books.
I have a question about actually sisters in giving dawah and position of speeches in front of particularly brothers as well. Just what I have read about Aisha, she's male and she had a screen, not just her veil, from what I have read, between her and there was a blind man who had come to see her once, and they had said, but he is blind, he can't see you, and she had said, but I can see him. How does that play in sisters giving dawah and in the position of giving speeches to an audience of brothers as well?
This was a choice of Aisha, but this was not an order of the Prophet of Allah. Okay, if the Prophet of Allah had dictated this, it would be something very different. But Aisha, while being a mother of the believer, we were not told that we were supposed to follow her example. We were told to follow the example of the Prophet of Allah and to also take the examples of the 4 perfect women, of which she was not one of those 4 perfect women. What she did was very good and very well, and this was best for her. She was also very, very young. Okay, I mean, she was very, very young. And it's more difficult for a young woman. I'm not a young woman, I'm a 50-year-old woman. And it's very different. There's also a difference in the way of interacting. Okay? I have a great veil up here right now. I can't see anybody because this light is so bright that the only people I can see are the ones sitting on this side of the room. If I come 1, 2, 3, I can see beyond 3 seats here, and that's it. Anything beyond there is a fuzzy veil. And I choose, even though I look around a room, I choose women to look at. I do not look at the men. I choose the women that are sitting in seats to look at. Or if I can just look around and I can't see anything but this huge bright light, and it serves the purpose of the veil. And I think my age also serves the purpose of the veil and my attitude. But again, it goes back to the fact that had this been ordered by Allah, or had this been the practice of the Sunnah, then I also would practice that.
Okay, I'll just just get a couple of questions from here, then I'll take one from the floor. Okay, one is kind of relevant to what you were talking about just now, and that is that how come the men and women are seated separately?
Because we value marriage in Islam. Marriage is very sacred. Of all relationships, the most important is that of marriage. And we go to great extents to avoid jealousy in our marriage relationships. And part of the jealousy can arise just by opportunities that exist. Many times in parties that Europeans attend, a husband and wife will go together, and having lived this myself and having experienced this myself, my husband was a very good-looking man. He truly was. And the women did look at him, and I was aware of how they looked at him. And they did grab every opportunity to hug him, and I did get jealous. I didn't appreciate it. But it was part of my society, and I had to accept it. In Islam, we know that those things hurt the marriage, and so we avoid any opportunity for jealousy to grow. Thus, we lower our gaze when we are dealing with people of the opposite sex. Thus, we limit our interactions. It's said that when a man and a woman are alone in a room together, there is a third party, and that third party is shaitan, or the devil, temptation. So we avoid those circumstances that could place us into temptation, or that could possibly cause rumors or jealous feelings to arouse. Was there another part of it? Okay.
On the question of polygamy, would I be correct in saying that it is also one of the rights of the women to refuse to accept a second wife?
I'm sorry, what? Huh?
On the question of polygamy, would I be correct or incorrect in assuming that it is one of the rights of the women to refuse the husband to have the second wife?
No, you can't refuse that which Allah allows. The only person who can refuse you a right is Allah. If Allah has allowed it, then it is permissible. What is granted to the woman is, if she is not willing to accept polygamy, what is granted in the Quran is her right to divorce him.
Isn't it in the hadith of the Quran which says that he must have permission from the first wife before he can accept the second wife?
No, doesn't require permission. However, he is warned, okay, that he's responsible as far as making his wife unhappy, and that if it's going to make his wife unhappy, then he either shouldn't do it, or he should recognize that she has the right to leave. But it doesn't say that he has to consult her. But how are you going to know if your wife is going to be unhappy and want a divorce if you don't talk to her? I mean, you've got to talk to her.
I have some doubt about that interpretation.
Okay, I'll just read one question and I'll take them from the floor. Okay, why does the Quran say that 2 female witnesses are needed for 1 male witness?
Okay, here's again a little thing. If we pick out one little thing without looking at the whole picture, you know. In one instance, in only one instance is this true. This is in areas of finance. In areas of finance, it requires 2 women to 1 man. There are other areas where a woman's testimony is stronger than a man's testimony. And there are areas where the testimony can be equal. Only in finance does the Quran say that it requires 2 women. Our cultures have taken this and carried it to the extreme. In some cases, we're not even allowed to witness. Now, there's something else that is very magnificent about this. At that time, women couldn't witness anything. What's really interesting is that while over 1,400 years ago Allah said that women had a right to witness things, in the West and throughout Europe, women still were not granted the right to witness. This right is less than 100 years old throughout all of North America and Europe. The right to witness a contract, of any contract. the right to sell property or do anything else. And yet, over 1,400 years ago, this was granted by Allah. We want to look at a little tiny piece and say this is negative, but we don't look at the positive side of this. And there is a positive side on this.
Okay, go ahead.
So my question is, can the husband restrict the wife to the home to what extent?
Okay, a wife is not supposed to leave the home without her husband's knowledge and even consent. However, a husband cannot restrict a wife when it comes to the visitation of her parents or the conducting of her own affairs. So he can't restrict her to that extent, nor can he deny her access to the mosque. She has the right to go to the mosque, and no man has a right to refuse that to her. But on other things, going to visit friends, going shopping and things like that, you are supposed to get your husband's permission first.
Another question from here is that, okay, there are these two questions I might as well tie them in together. In Surah Nisa, there is an ayah that condones the light beating of women. I know that Allah cannot believe that hurting the woman is okay. Could you please explain the interpretation of this ayah? And another question is to do with, you said that you seem to be saying that the prophetic and Quranic laws are just like the modern standards of equality. There's got to be a difference.
The difference is it goes way, way beyond anything that we have at present. We don't have anything near an equal standard between men and women or anything near equal to justice like what we have in Islam. There's no comparison with what we have now. I mean, we're struggling and striving to get back to Islamic law if the truth is known, and some people don't recognize the fact that what they're after is Islamic law. Before I knew about Islam, I was active in the women's liberation movement. My problem was I knew nothing about the Quran, I knew nothing about Islam, I knew nothing about what my true rights were. Had I had that knowledge at that time, had I had that knowledge back in the 60s, the women's movement might have been going in a different direction. Once I got that knowledge, then I recognized what God had given, and what we were struggling for was nothing. But gradually, we're moving back towards Islamic law. It's not that we're striving for what we have in the West, but rather that the West is striving towards Islamic law and doesn't even know it. There was another thing.
It says that the condoning of the light beating.
Oh, the light striking. Yes, I know. Different interpretations use beat, whip, they make it very, very violent. But actually, what the Quran does say is that under certain circumstances and after certain actions, a man may strike his wife lightly. Now, we asked the Prophet of Allah or the companions asked the Prophet of Allah about different things, and sometimes you tell them, don't ask. So there was no restriction. Okay, this was a restriction that a man could not do more than lightly strike his wife under certain circumstances, but nowhere in Quran or Hadith does it dictate how often or how hard a woman can strike a man. Allah didn't restrict that. He restricted the man and said, you can't do this. But there was no restriction placed on the woman. Except we shouldn't, all Muslims are forbidden from striking in the face. Okay? But understand that striking, whether it's a man or a woman, means there's a failure to communicate going on here, and you're putting your marriage in jeopardy. And if we're going to use the example of the perfect example, how many times did he strike any of his wives? Right, never. Were his wives quiet, submissive, and obedient? No way. There's very few women of today who can compete with the mothers of the believers for their strength and their determination. And they made his life miserable on occasions, but he never hit one. Never. So it's a restriction, it's a limitation on men, but they didn't limit the woman. Not too many more. Yeah.
Okay, are there any more questions from the floor?
Come up to the microphone. Okay.
There's a couple.
We have a sister with a baby too.
Could you come closer to the mic?
Assalamu alaikum. Okay. My question is for youth. You know this new craze that everyone's going wild and everything? How can Muslim teenagers, protect themselves from this? And exactly how can we avoid situations which can be very hard?
Actually, it's not a new craze. Even when I was young, teenagers were going wild. And even my daughter, who's 27, when she was young, I believe teenagers were growing wild. And I still think teenagers are going wild. The older person always thinks they're going wild. Unfortunately, in this case, it's true because the family has deteriorated to such an extent that the teenagers have no one to turn to. And where we live, it's a very interesting thing because most of the children are locked, the children, junior high school children, my youngest is in junior high school, most of the junior high school children are actually locked out of their homes until their parents come home from work. Now understand that Kansas and Toronto have very similar weather. Okay, very similar weather. There have been many times that children come to my house, 13, 14, and 15-year-old boys, because it's raining and it's cold and they have no place to go. What are they going to do? They're going to go hang out somewhere. They're going to do something to try and stay warm, and their parents won't let them in their houses. Their parents aren't there for them, and they have nowhere else to go. But they all know, oh, we can go to Khala Aminah's house, and she's going to have a big pot of hot stew, which we could eat all of it if we want to, because she'll just make another supper, and it's no problem. And they come to my house, but they know also in my house there's no profanity. There's no lewdness. There's no drugs. There's no alcohol. And they know that when it's time to pray, we're going to pray. If they want to join us, even though they're not Muslim, they're welcome to. But when it's time to pray, everyone is going to sit down in the room with us and be quiet. And let us do our prayers. And this has done a lot to changing the way some of these children are thinking and feeling. And some of these children are no longer as wild as they used to be. I'm getting reports from the school about how the children are changing, and they're talking about Khala Aminah. And they finally figured out that Khala Aminah was, oh, that's Muhammad's mother. They didn't know who this or what this Khala Aminah was. They thought it was a teen hangout somewhere. Okay. The kids have no place. They have no one. And we, the Muslim parents, I mean, does it really hurt to provide a safe haven for children that aren't Muslim? Do we have to teach our children, to stay away from the kafirs and keep everything away? Can't we provide safe havens? Can't we provide clubs and activities and things for all of the children, Muslim and non-Muslim, to participate in? If we did that, we wouldn't have as much trouble. I can't tell you how many of these teenagers have quit smoking because they can't do it if they come to my house. And if they come to my house and I smell cigarettes on them, I go, please go take a shower. Don't breathe in my direction. And they don't want to hurt my feelings. At first they thought, boy, she's weird. But now then, they really have respect for us. And they're doing really well. And a few of the boys have actually asked if they could come to Jummah prayer with us. And 2 of the children have asked if they could attend the Mina conference in December. And they're not Muslim. I'd love to bring them, but I'm afraid of how the Muslims might interact with them and that they might drive them away before we secure them. We need to provide safe havens. We can complain about how our children are growing wild, but if we don't provide some activities for them, an alternative for them, what can we expect? They have no one in their own homes. They have no example. They have no love. Now I've got all these teenage girls calling and telling me all of their problems. My son is getting unhappy because his friends prefer to talk to me. He's getting jealous. Sometimes he tells me, Mom, could you just go in the other room so they'll talk to me for a while? They accept my hijab. They accept my strictness. They don't do anything that would offend me. If they offend me, I mean, they're practically on their knees begging me to forgive them. And I know they're not this way with their parents. They'll also stand up and fight for me. We can touch a lot of people if we just open our hearts. And it's not a hard thing to do. Help our teenagers by providing them places and activities and things to do. And include the non-Muslim children. They're not as vile and as obnoxious as you may think. I used to be one. I used to be one.
Any more questions from the floor?
If you want, we have some videotapes of previous talks on women in Islam, including the debate with the journalist from the Atlantic Journal about women behind the veil. And my son is dealing with that in some way. I also have some books by a phenomenal brother named Jeffrey Lang that I strongly recommend. If you haven't heard of Jeffrey Lang, he used to be an atheist. You know, one of those people that didn't believe there was really a God. And he was serious about it. Highly educated man was sure there was no God. Now he is very sure there is a God. He's a Muslim. And he wrote in a book about his struggle. And you can benefit from reading the book because it'll teach you how to answer the questions of the intellectual. So it's really, really good. Inshallah, he'll be speaking at the Maya conference in December, the Maya, Minna, and CIII convention that's happening in Chicago in December. So if you get a chance to hear him, he's something else. Okay, I thank you very much for your time and your patience and your tolerance. I ask you to remember that I am a human with my own weaknesses. What I have said that is correct is from Allah. If I have made mistakes, they are from me, and I ask you to forgive me for any errors that I have made.